Hello, friends, and welcome to Staying in My Lane podcast. If you're new, welcome. If you're not new, welcome back. You can find this podcast pretty much anywhere, any platform. Just search Staying in My Lane podcast. I do have a new logo because we are on season 2 of Staying in My Lane podcast. We have talked about a lot of different topics on this podcast. I've had a lot of feedback. I've actually gotten a few emails since I added that, and you can find my email to this podcast in the link in the description below. Email me questions, email me topic ideas, whatever you want to, email me and I will answer. So we've talked about generational trauma, the toxic family, conditional love, the scapegoat, all of that. If you haven't listened, go back to season 1 and listen to that. And today we're going to sit with something very sensitive, but very real. Something that many people live with in silence, and that is the decision to walk away from family or distance themselves from family, whether it's extended family, immediate family, whatever. And this means to go no contact. The pain of being unheard, unseen, and never acknowledged. The pain of feeling unwanted or feeling like you're not validated. And before we start, I want to say this up front. This is not an easy conversation. It's not a clean-cut, one-size-fits-all situation. And I know from conversations that I've had before I cut people off who I'm related to, that a lot of my family are very unhappy with the fact that I have started this podcast. They are not happy with the fact that I have discussed generational trauma. And again, I want to reiterate, this is not an attack on anybody. I'm not specifying any certain family member. And often, if it feels like it's an attack, there's probably some work to do internally for that person who feels upset. And that is not my place to make anybody or force anybody to work on themselves or change. However, it is my place to protect my peace and heal myself from the pain and trauma that my family has personally caused to me. And some people are never going to admit when they're wrong. Some people are never going to see through the fact that they may have caused intentional or unintentional pain to someone, whether it's a family member, a friend, a spouse, a child, whoever. Maybe for you, if you're listening, walking away was an act of survival, not an act of spite. And for me, I am the type of person, and I know it's something I'm really trying to work on because I've said it in past episodes, I feel the need to say all my feelings and get all my feelings out through a long message. And I did that with a family member. And she responded with the fact that I may feel or think things happened that probably didn't happen, or I may think or feel a certain way. That may not be true. That's kind of summarizing it, but you get the gist of it. People often say, but they're your family. And I want to respond to something that is very simple. Yes, and that does not give them the right to hurt me over and over again and never take responsibility. And that's exactly what certain people in my family have done. Let's start there. The decision to go no contact. Choosing to go no contact with family is not made lightly. It's not an impulsive decision, and it's taken me years and decades of being hurt, dismissed, gaslit, neglected, and even physically assaulted. It's taken me years to realize that they are not going to change. Sometimes people live in delusional glass houses that they think cannot crack. But sometimes when those cracks start to show, they're going to end up with a reality check. Staying in constant contact with someone just because they're biologically related to you and when they've consistently harmed you, that is not love. It's self-abandonment. And when it cuts even deeper is when you finally gather the strength to set a boundary, maybe the first one of your entire life, which is what I've done. I can't do this anymore. My hope deep down was that maybe this will shake something loose within this family member and they'll finally hear what I'm saying or what I feel. But then I was met with silence and blame. And if you can relate to that, you probably feel as if you're painted as the villain, the ungrateful one, the dramatic one. No one asks what hurt you. No one says, tell me what happened or tell me how you feel. There's no ownership, no apology, just a wall. And if we're being completely honest, that kind of silence is deafening. You know, I feel like I did my part in trying to find a way to reach out to my family with a couple episodes of this podcast while also being relatable to other people who go through generational trauma, generational healing, because that is a topic that is so not talked about and it's so taboo that we almost feel guilty for even saying it or bringing it up. And for me, I felt guilty for a really long time for bringing up the fact that I felt like the scapegoat and the black sheep of the family. I actually felt guilty for standing up for myself. How weird is that? So why is it so hard for toxic families to take accountability? This isn't just about blame. I've done a lot of research on this, by the way, so this is something that I do not take lightly. These conversations that I have on this podcast, the guests I bring on, we discuss things and we dive really deep into the topics that we discuss and try to find the root issues or the root causes of things that we don't feel comfortable talking about aloud, the awkward conversations, the uncomfortable issues that we go through, the situations that we are put in, and also the things that we've suppressed. Again, this is not just about blame. We are back to the conversation. Sorry, I went way off topic. It's about understanding the root of generational patterns, emotional immaturity, and what prevents certain families from owning up to the harm that they've caused. Let's start with a quick definition of accountability in healthy families and what this looks like. Acknowledging when harm is done is number 1. Apologizing sincerely is number 2. Making efforts to change harmful behavior is number 3. Now, that might sound really simple, but for many people in toxic family systems or dysfunctional family systems, that's a fantasy. It's often met with denial, defensiveness, gaslighting, or even punishment for speaking up. Why is that? Why do some families completely reject accountability? The first reason that families avoid accountability is denial. Denial is the psychological defense mechanism. It assists people in avoiding pain or shame. For some family members, especially parents or elders, admitting when they were wrong might mean confronting their own trauma. We've talked about that too. A lot of the older generations suppress and put their feelings away because that was normalized when they were growing up. Some family members may realize that they weren't the kind, protective figure they believed themselves to be. Maybe that's hard to own up to that or accept that. And let's be honest, this can be terrifying. So instead, they deny that it ever happened. They rewrite history. They say things like, "You're too sensitive. I don't think that happened. I think you're imagining something different. And I did the best I could." Does that sound familiar to anyone? And if you have listened to this whole podcast, you can kind of revert this back to narcissism. And I'm not necessarily saying that my family is narcissist. However, I'm starting to realize that narcissism runs pretty deep in my family and that I am the one who has broken the cycle. This isn't just about forgetting, it's about protecting an identity. Toxic family members often build their self-worth around being the good parent, the strong sibling, the great daughter, the one who helps everybody, who helps feed the homeless, who helps clothe the women's shelter, who held everything together. And there's nothing wrong with helping those people. There's nothing wrong with being a good person. But when you put on a front or you treat people behind closed doors a certain way and out in public you are considered a certain type of person, when that image is challenged, that person will become threatened. Again, because it's all a facade and wearing a mask, which in turn creates defensiveness. Toxic behavior is often passed down. If your parents never saw their own parents take accountability, then they're likely that they have never learned to do it themselves. Think about it. If a child grows up in a home where emotions are pushed down or suppressed, apologies are non-existent, and love is conditional, what do they learn? They learn that vulnerability is dangerous. They learn that being wrong is shameful, that power matters more than truth. So when you, the cycle breaker, come along and ask for accountability, it's like speaking a language they never learned. Some may even feel attacked just because you're asking them to reflect. This is not an excuse, but it's an explanation. And I'm really starting to see that in my own family, that when I ask them, "Hey, can you please just listen to me?" that may feel like an attack because they are not ready to reflect on the fact that they may have hurt my feelings. They may have made me feel unseen or unheard. Let's talk about control. In toxic families, control often replaces connection. If one family member has always been dominant, maybe a parent, a sibling, an aunt, grandparent, whoever, they may see accountability as a loss of control. Apologizing means giving up the upper hand. It means admitting that they're not perfect. And in systems built on control, that's not allowed or accepted. So instead of owning up, they manipulate, they guilt trip, and they make you the problem. That's why confronting toxic behavior gets flipped around. Suddenly you're disrespectful, you're dramatic, you are ungrateful, you are remembering it wrong, and you're just making things up or telling untruths, when in reality, they are just mad that you called them out on something that they were not ready to take accountability on. The truth is that you're just telling the truth and you're saying how you feel, and that threatens the illusion that they've spent years building. That threatens the illusion and their image of a family that they have worked really long and hard on building. When families avoid accountability, everyone loses. Relationships stay shallow, resentment festers, real healing never happens, and worst of all, the cycle continues into the next generation. If you never hear that, "I'm sorry," or "I understand how that hurt you," you're left with emotional weight that wasn't yours to carry. And for me, I'm breaking that cycle for my children. I am breaking that cycle of a toxic and dysfunctional family pattern. I had a family member tell me that families don't have to talk all the time. And yes, I know that. But when I'm not talked to at all, or when my messages go unread or unanswered, how am I supposed to feel? And that's why I've decided to go no contact, because it's not about revenge for me. It's about survival. It's about protecting my peace when others won't take that responsibility for their impact on my life. Toxic family members can't take accountability because it would mean facing their own pain, shame, or loss of control, and in turn causing them to have to reflect on their behavior and change. And if they're really comfortable with living in their own illusion or delusion, they're not going to want to do that. You don't have to carry the burden of unhealed wounds. For me, realizing that healing doesn't have to come from reconciliation, it can come through releasing. That was the point where I turned and I decided I'm going to go no contact, because I realized that repeating the same thing over and over for years on end is not going to change my family's perspective. It's not going to stop or halt their judgments, misunderstandings, assumptions of me, and that may be true for you too. Why is it so common for families, especially toxic or dysfunctional ones, to deny the harm that they've caused to you, or deny the fact that they may have misjudged you or misunderstand you? The first one is emotional immaturity and shame. Most of the time, family members who refuse to acknowledge your pain has less to do with you and more to do with them. This is something that has helped me to start healing. And admitting when they hurt you means admitting that they are flawed. And again, when you live in a glass house that you feel is perfect and not cracked, they may not be ready to do that. That maybe they weren't perfect as a parent or a daughter or an older sibling or the good one in the family. And maybe their image means more to them than you understand. But here's the real kicker. Emotionally immature people are allergic to shame. They don't know how to hold space for guilt without collapsing into defensiveness or anger. So they avoid, they gaslight, they blame you for being the sensitive one or remembering it wrong. The next one is that generational and cultural norms. Sometimes talking about feelings is a luxury that no one learned. You might hear things like, "We gave you a roof over your head, didn't we?" Or, "My parents were way worse, you had it easy." Or one of my personal examples that can be relatable is, "We gave you clothes, we passed things down to you so you didn't have to go buy them. We did this for you." And this is gaslighting. This doesn't make what you went through any less real. It just means that they never had the tools in their toolbox that we talk about, and they're too afraid or proud to pick them up now, so they just won't. And that leads me to power and control. Acknowledging your pain puts you in a position of emotional power, which is a threat to them. It means they'd have to meet you with humility, and in toxic family systems or dysfunctional families, humility is seen as a weakness. Control is king and power. And if speaking up and speaking your truth disrupts that control and power, they'll often shut you down or punish you for it, or even meet you with silence. So what happens when your pain is denied? You might question your own reality. Was it really that bad? Turn the pain inward. Maybe it was my fault. Overfunction. If I'm just better, maybe I'll finally be loved. That last one is something that I really, really tried to do. This is the root of so many trauma responses: people pleasing, perfectionism, self doubt. But when your family won't acknowledge that they hurt you, you may start trying to earn their love. This just isn't unfair. It's really soul crushing, and it's something that, holy cow, I've experienced. And it's now, 34 years of me, well, not 34 years of me consistently trying, because I couldn't the whole 34, but it's probably 20 years of me trying to be something, be part of my family, be accepted by my family, be seen as an adult, because I've never been seen as that. And that is true, because I've had multiple people tell me that. And one of the hardest truths is that you might never get that apology that you want. You might never hear them say, I see how I hurt you and I'm sorry. And that's where grief comes in. I feel really strongly that we go through the 7 stages of grief during this time. Not grief for death, but grief for a relationship that never truly existed in the way that you needed it to. And for me, as an only child, that is really hard for me. I looked up to certain family members for a long time until I saw who they were and saw that they are the loudest people in the room, which means that they're probably the most arrogant and the weakest, because a lot of it is all about me, 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 me. And that contributed a lot to me feeling invisible and unheard and not wanting to be seen, or, I never got to share my things, my life. And so I constantly would rush to tell them things that I was struggling going through or that I wanted their empathy for. But then I realized that I never was going to get it. And this grief is really heavy, but it's also very freeing, because once you stop chasing that validation from people who refuse to give it to you, you can start giving it to yourself. You stop negotiating your reality. You can stop wanting and waiting for someone to tell you that your pain is real. And you can look in the mirror and say, that was not okay. I deserved better, which again took me years to do. And I'm not trying to shame or put down people that I share bloodlines with, but when you hurt somebody and you can't take that accountability or responsibility and say that you're sorry, then that just shows and speaks volumes of who they are as a person. And that's on them. That's not on you. That's not your job to hold space or try to change them or force them to see that your feelings were hurt. And by now, if they're in their 40s or whatever, or 30s, whatever, they may not change. They may be completely content living in their glass house. And that's fine. I'm going to live in my log cabin because I'm always adding on and building on to my house. And I don't mean that in a literal sense. I mean that as in I'm always growing and expanding. And some people just can't do that. What about if you're the family scapegoat? We've talked about that in a couple episodes briefly. If you've always felt like the one who's blamed or misunderstood or labeled as the problem, I've said that I can relate to you. And being scapegoated by your own family can leave you with deep scars emotionally and mentally. This leads to emotional confusion, low self-worth, and the feeling that no matter what you do, it's never good enough. But today, I just want to unpack what scapegoating is and why it happens, and most importantly, how to break free from that. We've talked about it before, but not as in depth as now. In dysfunctional families, roles are often assigned, whether people realize it or not, which is something that I really never noticed until probably a couple years ago when I started doing research into narcissistic families, toxic families, and things like that. You may have heard of the golden child, the lost child, the hero, the mascot, but today we are focusing on one of the most painful roles, the scapegoat. The scapegoat, as I've said previously, is the person who the family projects its problems onto. They get blamed for everything. They're called too sensitive, difficult, rebellious, or dramatic, which is funny because I've heard all of those words about me, but my family doesn't even know me. It's really weird, to be honest with you. I'm criticized more, I'm punished harder, and I'm often misunderstood entirely. And that's been that way since I was a child. I actually have memories, very vivid memories of things that I experienced where I was embarrassed or shamed. And it often came from holiday get togethers. And so for me, I have a very big issue and I tend to have that fight or flight mode whenever there's a holiday. And my mother in law could probably tell you that. My husband could probably tell you that. My anxiety flies through the roof at every Christmas and every Thanksgiving because often growing up when I was younger, I was made to feel small and unnoticed at family get togethers. And then when I married my first husband, he always made it a huge deal and it very much stressed me out. And so I have a lot of trauma around holidays, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. So, why does this happen? Why would a family single out one person, often from a young age, as the problem? Let's look at the psychology behind it. Projection. In psychology, projection is when someone takes part of themselves they don't want to deal with, the anger, shame, fear, and places it onto someone else. Those are just some examples. The scapegoat becomes a mirror the family doesn't want to look into. So, hey, that's me. In many dysfunctional families, appearances are everything. The family may not want to be seen as imperfect. They may want to seem perfect from the outside. So when something threatens that image, like truth, emotional honesty, boundaries, or a podcast, it has to be dealt with. Enter the scapegoat, me, in this position. The scapegoat is the one who gets blamed for everything so that everyone else can avoid looking inward and growing. It's easier to say, you're the problem, than admit that we are hurting each other. Generational trauma, we've talked about it. Scapegoating often has roots in generational trauma. Maybe your parent was the scapegoat in their family. Maybe they swore they'd never be like their parents, and when old wounds got triggered, they found a new target. You. I'm not saying this happened to me. That's just my example of it because it seems like a really good example. But my parents, I'm not talking about my parents in that sense at all. So moving on, let's talk about what it feels like to be the scapegoat, because often it starts really early before you have even had the language to understand what's happening. And I never actually heard the word scapegoat or understood what it was until I was around 30 years old. Here are some signs that you can be the scapegoat. You're blamed for things that are not your fault or for that others did to you. You're treated differently than your siblings, your cousins, your family members, with less support and more punishment. Your emotions are invalidated or mocked or gossiped about. You're the one who gets cut off, isolated, or made to feel like an outsider. When you speak the truth, you're told you're creating drama. Hello, my podcast. If you try to set boundaries, you're accused of being disrespectful or cruel. And worst of all, you may start to believe them. And I did for a while. I internalized it that I was the problem. But then when I realized I wasn't, I was simply being the most visible person in a system that refused to face itself. And that was a little bit of a weight off my shoulders because being scapegoated leaves deep wounds. And if you've experienced this, you may carry chronic self-doubt. You question your own perceptions and memories or instincts. But once I started looking at what I went through and why I do the things I do, I started realizing that a lot of my trauma was real and a lot of the things that I felt were valid. And people-pleasing tendencies was the next one because you try to stay small, agreeable, and invisible just to avoid more blame. I did that for a very, very long time. Toxic guilt. You feel responsible for things that were never your fault. And you have a distorted sense of self. You don't know who you really are because your identity was shaped around being wrong. And I felt that so deeply. It's something that I experienced for a very long time, and I really came to terms with in therapy. And I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. I felt like I was fundamentally flawed. And let me say this to whoever is listening who may feel this way. You are not broken. You are reacting normally to an abnormal environment. It took me a very long time to understand that statement, that I was reacting normally to an abnormal environment. What I was feeling and what I was experiencing as an only child who wanted so deeply to have a sense of family and belonging and importance, that was okay the way I was reacting because at the time I didn't know any other way to react and I didn't know that it was a toxic environment. I thought it was normal to feel invisible, unseen, and unheard. So how do we break free from that? Here's what I want you to hear. You do not have to keep living in the story that they wrote about you. You don't have to live in their narrative. So when you kind of begin to step out of that scapegoat role, name it, call it what it is. You weren't overreacting. You were being scapegoated. And naming that abuse, and I don't mean physical abuse, I mean emotional abuse, which is what it is the first act of power. Seek truth outside the system. Talk to a therapist. That's what I did. Read books on trauma and family roles. Again, something I did. Find people who affirm your experience and not deny it, which took me a very long time because my family on both sides has hurt me. And I've had some things said to me from mostly one certain side in particular that are very judgmental, and even had a relative tell me that they have judged me and misunderstood me and had made assumptions of my life for years. And she even admitted that that wasn't okay, but then turned around and got upset when I told her how I felt. So there comes the no contact. Set boundaries, even if it means distance. Sometimes healing means stepping back. You may need to go low or no contact to protect your peace. That doesn't make you cruel or malicious. It makes you brave, and it's an act of love. Reclaim your narrative. They may have tried to define you as difficult, but you can redefine yourself as resilient, insightful, empathetic, a cycle breaker, which is what I am. And that took me a very long time. I don't like to give myself compliments or give myself any credit for things that I've done, because I have a very difficult time hearing good things about myself, because for so long I lived in that delusion of feeling like I wasn't good enough. But guess what? It's often the scapegoat who becomes the healer. If you've been the scapegoat, if you know the loneliness, the confusion, the ache of wondering why your own family couldn't love you for who you are, I am here for you. It was never about you. It was about their refusal to face their own wounds, their own guilt, their own mess, and their own harm that they've caused. The truth is that you were the easiest one to blame. And in my situation, I think I see that because I'm the youngest in my family on one side, and I'm an only child. So I didn't have a sibling to defend me, and I didn't have anyone to stand up for me or take my side. So I was immediately targeted out. But in my case, because I was honest, because I noticed, because I didn't play along with their games and their illusion, their facade, that made me strong, not broken, which is a threat. And I'm sure that there are people listening who feel the exact same way as I do. And that's what I want to leave you with. You are allowed to walk away from roles that were never yours to carry, wounds and bruises that you were never meant to heal. You are allowed to build a life based on truth and not survival. This is really hard for me to speak on. Why does it feel so hard to speak the truth about family? For many of us, that family is supposed to be sacred, right? We've talked about that in depth. Society tells us to honor your parents, honor your family, to keep things private, not air your dirty laundry. So when we do start to speak up about that emotional abuse, manipulation, gaslighting, neglect, or toxicity, we feel guilty. And this conversation has gotten pretty intense and personal for me. But what I want to share and also remind myself of is that silence doesn't protect the truth, it protects dysfunction. I'm going to repeat that one more time. Silence does not protect truth, it protects dysfunction. And if you grew up in a toxic family, chances are you were taught that you were not allowed to talk about what's really happening. You were told that we don't talk about things outside of your house, or you learned that expressing that pain, again, meant that you were being dramatic. Or you watched your truth be denied or reshaped or used against you. And this is how family secrets are built. They don't just stay secrets, they become emotional prisons. The real tragedy is the longer you stay silent, the more you begin to question your own experience. And here it is. I'm laying it all out for everyone, because for so long I held on to a lot of pain. I held on to the hope that things would change. But again, we cannot change people who don't want to change. And I want to leave you with this. You don't speak the truth to change them, you speak it to free yourself. That is what I'm doing right now. Not everyone will understand. Not everyone will believe you. Not everyone will want to go there with you. But your healing doesn't depend on their agreement. It depends on your willingness to stop betraying yourself to keep the peace. Because peace built on silence is not peace. It's performance. It's all that glass house, that facade, the mask. Speaking the truth is about reclaiming your voice, your reality, and your power. So, friends, you are allowed to speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. You are allowed to name the harm even if they never apologize to you. And you are allowed to rewrite your story even if they stay stuck in their own version. The truth does not need to be perfect to be powerful. It just needs to be your truth. And when you start owning your mistakes and taking accountability for your part in the hurt, or when you start acknowledging the real version of what happened and you start healing, that is a threat to those who do not want to acknowledge or change their behavior. That's a threat to those who don't want to take accountability. But again, that is not yours to fix. That is not yours to own. You focus on you and continue to grow. And that's the best gift that you can give to yourself. Because again, the most important relationship that we have is the one that we have with ourselves out of any relationship in our entire life. So again, thank you so much for listening today. If this episode spoke to your experience, share it with someone that you trust or keep it as a reminder that you are not alone. Speaking the truth about toxic family is not easy. It's not normalized. It's not comfortable, but it's the first step towards emotional freedom. Remember to be gentle with your truth and fierce with your healing. Until next time, I will see you later.